Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tackling a question that, let's be honest, gets to all of us. Why is it so ridiculously hard to stick to our goals? Well, it turns out the answer isn't at all what we've been told. And the science? It shows our brains are actually wired for success. We just have to learn the right way to program them. All right, let's just jump right in. You know the feeling. You buy the new running shoes, you stock the fridge with healthy food, you block out time on your calendar to finally finish that big project. You are buzzing with motivation. But then, a few weeks later, the motivation's gone, and you're right back where you started. So what gives? Well, there's a huge gap between what we want to do and what we actually do. And this number, wow, this really puts that gap into perspective. A massive review of health behavior studies found that we only succeed in turning our intentions into action about 53% of the time. That is literally a coin toss. And for decades, the story we've been sold to explain this failure is always the same, right? We're told willpower is like a muscle. You use it, it gets tired, and then bam, you give in to temptation. It's a really simple, compelling story. But what if that story isn't just wrong? What if believing in that story is the very thing that's holding us back? So, let's pull back the curtain on this whole willpower myth. And we're going to start with the classic experiment that seemed to prove it all in the first place. Okay, so picture this. It's the 90s, and researchers bring people into a lab that is filled with the amazing smell of fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies. One group was told, you have to eat these radishes, and whatever you do, do not touch the cookies. The other lucky group, they got to eat the cookies. And afterwards, both groups were given an impossible puzzle to solve. And get this, the people who had to resist the cookies, the radish eaters, they gave up on the puzzle in just 8 minutes. But the cookie eaters, they kept going for nearly 19 minutes. The conclusion seemed totally obvious. The radish group had drained their willpower battery. But when hundreds of scientists tried to replicate this in a giant study with over 2,000 people, the whole story just fell apart. They found zero evidence for this so-called ego depletion. Now, here is where it gets really interesting. This is the big twist. The researchers found that the only people who showed any signs of depletion were the ones who already believed that willpower was a limited resource. Think about that. If you think it's a finite tank, it becomes one for you. The deciding factor wasn't some willpower muscle, it was your mindset. And hey, this wasn't just some one-off finding. I mean, think about the famous marshmallow test. You know the one. The original study basically said that a kid's ability to wait for a second marshmallow could predict all sorts of future success, suggesting some of us are just born with more self-control. But again, there is so much more to the story. In a really clever follow-up study, researchers set up 2 scenarios. For one group of kids, they made promises and they kept them. For the other group, they broke their promises. And when they then did the marshmallow test, the kids who were in that reliable, trustworthy environment, they waited 4 times longer. It wasn't about innate self-control at all. It was a totally rational choice based on whether they could trust their environment. Okay, so if willpower isn't the big bad wolf we thought it was, what is the real reason for that 53% success rate? Well, the answer lies in how our brains are designed to be almost lazy. In a good way, incredibly efficient. You can think of it like this. You've got 2 different systems running in your brain. You've got the planner. That's your conscious, goal-setting, forward-thinking self. But then you've got the autopilot. And this system is an absolute master of efficiency. It doesn't think, it doesn't reason, it just runs habits on a loop to save energy. And it is incredibly powerful. The autopilot runs on this surprisingly simple piece of code, and it's called the habit loop. It always starts with a cue, some kind of trigger in your environment. That cue then creates a craving. The craving drives a response. That's your actual habit, which then delivers a reward. This simple 4-step loop is the hidden engine behind almost everything we do every single day. And here's why that loop is so powerful and so hard to break. Every single time you complete it, your brain gets this satisfying little hit of a neurotransmitter called dopamine. And that dopamine basically tells your brain, hey, that was good, let's remember to do that again. This reward strengthens the habit's neural pathway, carving it deeper and deeper into your brain. And it does this whether the habit is good for you or bad for you. So this brings us to the most crucial point of all. Achieving your goals isn't about overpowering your autopilot in some constant, brutal battle of willpower. It's about being a smarter programmer and just giving your autopilot better instructions to follow. So, tool number one for doing this is a strategy that sounds kind of fancy but is incredibly simple. It's called an implementation intention, and research shows it has a medium to large effect on actually achieving your goals. It's basically a simple line of code for your brain that follows this formula. If this situation happens, then I will take this specific action. What this does is it takes all the struggle and decision making out of the moment. So instead of a vague goal like, I'll try to walk more, you create a precise command. If I finish work on Tuesday, then I will immediately change into my walking shoes. See? You've given your autopilot a clear, preloaded instruction. The decision is already made, no willpower required. Okay, strategy number two tackles another core truth about our brains. Your autopilot hates big, scary, difficult changes. So what's the solution? Make the new habit ridiculously small. The author James Clear calls this the 2-minute rule. The goal isn't to read a whole chapter. It's just to read one page. It's not to run 3 miles. It's just to put on your running shoes. The action should feel so easy that it's almost absurd not to do it. And this is just a brilliant illustration of how to make that tiny habit stick. You anchor it or link it to a routine you already have. This is called habit stacking. So instead of trying to find new motivation for a new behavior, you simply latch it onto something your autopilot already does without even thinking, like pouring your morning coffee. All right, let's move into our final section and see how all of these pieces, the mindset, the autopilot, the tiny habits, how they all come together to build a completely new way of thinking about change, one that's based on design, not on discipline. What this really means is shifting your focus away from that internal struggle, trying to force change through sheer effort, and shifting it towards external design. You start asking, how can I actually architect my surroundings so that the right choice becomes the easiest choice? And here are 4 really powerful principles for doing just that. You want to make the cues for your good habits obvious and easy. And you do the exact opposite for your bad habits, make them difficult and invisible. And listen, this is not just a nice theory. One study found that people who actively shape their environment like this were 76% more likely to maintain their new habits for the long haul. Because in the end, it's about understanding that real meaningful change is the product of compounding interest. It's not about one heroic, monumental effort. It's about the thousands of tiny, almost unnoticeable trades you make, day after day, that add up to a completely different future. And that brings us to our final thought. The science is really clear on this. The secret to sticking to your goals isn't about finding more willpower. It's about creating a system where you need less of it. So the question to leave you with is this. What is one habit so small it feels like you can't possibly fail that you could start today?